Good morning.
Morning.
Matthew 14 is where we're going to pick up this morning. So, Jesus has been going around and from place to place, and most recently, last week, he was at Nazareth again. And that's where we're going to pick up the story this week. But Jesus has been, his ministry has been kind of in the northern part of Judea, up by the Sea of Galilee. And most of his ministry actually takes place in and around the Sea of Galilee. And I was doing some study, and basically, this region of Judea, if you were from Jerusalem or down there in the south, that was where all the upper class Jewish people lived. Like, if you were a good, not a hick, you lived down in the southern part of the country, and they figured the hicks kind of lived up north. And this area around Nazareth and the area we call the Decapolis, that was kind of like this border area between where there were some Jewish people that were probably, okay, and then there was a lot of intermarriages because that's where the Gentiles were the closest up there. And they were not looked at as the best and the brightest. In fact, we'd even say that they talk funny, because you're gonna see later in the book where Peter's there at the outside the high priest's office, and they're trying at Jesus' trial. He's going to deny being a Galilean, being one of them. They're going to say, "Of course you are. You sound like them. You talk funny." And the interesting thing about this is they did sort of have their own language a little bit. It was a type of Aramaic. Everybody back then that was Jewish spoke Aramaic. And you might speak Hebrew, but your Hebrew was going to be like more your Sunday go to synagogue Hebrew. That's where proper Hebrew was read. Aramaic was the language of the day. And then if you were doing business with the Gentile world, you probably spoke some Greek. And that was kind of the main language of trade. And then, of course, because they're under Roman rule, the other language that would be commonly used would be Latin. And those four languages were widely in place. But on a day-to-day basis, Jesus probably spoke Northern Galilean, dialect of Aramaic. His apostles, the 12, same thing. That doesn't mean they didn't have a smattering of Greek or have some Sabbath school Hebrew, or even maybe occasionally be able to pick something out in Latin. And I can see you all just getting excited about Latin, just like you were in high school, right? But they had different words. And sometimes when those words get translated from Aramaic into Greek, get written down and held for us for 2,000 years, and then somebody translates them into Greek, from Greek, into English, and we started doing that process a little better than 400 years ago. Sometimes some of those words get messed up. Like, the way it was meant back then is not necessarily the way we read it now. And that's going to come up with one point here that I'm going to get to in just a minute. So chapter 14, verse 1 takes kind of like an aside. We've been looking at Jesus' ministry, and then we're getting this kind of other story here. It says, "At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, 'This is John the Baptist. He's been raised from the dead, and for this reason these powers are at work at him.'" Now, the report he hears about Jesus is the same report that everybody in and around the Jewish world at that time was hearing about this rabbi who is incredible, right? He's incredible. They go out and they hear what he has to say, and they're amazed by it because nobody's ever preached like this that they've ever heard. He's not sitting there quoting what some other rabbi said or pulling out something from the Talmud. He is teaching them as one who has authority. So the crowds are following because of that. But there's another reason that Jesus can really pack them in and get a full stadium full of people, or hillside or lakeside or wherever he's at. And that's because Jesus is doing the most amazing miracles anybody has ever heard of. Now, they have stories back in the prophets, they have things back in the law, and they knew that Moses had done miracles, but Moses was special, and Elijah was special, and these signs and wonders that these guys did, they were written down, but they didn't really have that many of them, if you want to be honest about it. Moses did. Moses had a lot of stuff he laid out there in front of Pharaoh, and at different times after the Israelites left, there were some pretty amazing acts of power, like Korah's rebellion, the earth swallowing them up, or they wouldn't follow God the way they were supposed to, so God sent whole masses of poisonous snakes into their camp to bite them. I mean, there were some amazing miracles. But here this guy, Jesus, comes along, and Jesus, it tells us in several places, Jesus healed everybody of everything. In fact, we're going to see where there's language here that says, they just wanted to touch his robe. If I can just touch his robe, I'll get healed from this terrible thing I've got going on. If I can just touch him. And even other people were like, Jesus, I want you to help my servant, help my kid. And they'd say, well, yeah, Jesus says, I'll go. And no, you don't even have to. If you just say the word, I believe you. It's going to happen. He'll be healed. So this is the story of what Jesus is doing, and he's casting out demons, and he's healing the blind, he's making lepers clean, he's doing all kinds of just amazing things, and no miracle is too hard for him. And this is not a case of you go to the faith healing and the guy's up there, if you have enough faith. Jesus healed everybody. There wasn't a faith test. The fact that you asked for it was the only test you had to pass. That was it. And there's no record of Jesus ever passing a collection plate to get a miracle. Didn't happen. So all the people are talking about this. They didn't have social media. They didn't have newspapers. They didn't have television. They just had to tell somebody. And that's how they got to hear about it. Well, this report is getting repeated so much that it comes up, and Herod's the tetrarch, or he's the head governor, the king, whatever you want to call him, of Judah, ruling it for the Romans. And he's the number one guy. He's in charge. So this report comes to him, and Herod says, this is going to be John the Baptist. John the Baptist has been raised from the dead. That's how come he has all these miraculous powers. Now, Herod never saw Jesus up until this point. He doesn't. Herod doesn't get to see Jesus until the day he has him killed. So Herod has seen John the Baptist, but Herod hasn't seen Jesus. So Herod, in his mind, says, this is John the Baptist raised from the dead. That's how come he has all these miraculous otherworldly powers. And Herod's a little bit afraid. This is why. For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife. Okay. Because John had been telling him it's not lawful for you to have her. What's going on here? Seems like King Herod took his brother's wife, moved her into the royal palace, and was living with her in a way that he wasn't supposed to be living with her. And in doing that, John the Baptist found out about it, and John the Baptist John the Baptist decided to go and say something about what God's standards for sexual morality were. And John the Baptist didn't care who he had to say it to, because he walked in the palace and told Herod. And apparently, the way this is written here, it says John had been telling him. Like it wasn't a one-off. John is speaking God's truth, and Herod says, well, the truth shall make you free, except for right now, you're getting tossed in prison. And Herod throws John in the dungeon because of what John was saying. Now, Herod wanted to put him to death, but he was afraid of the crowd because they regarded John as a prophet. So Herod, if he would have had his druthers, he would have done something about John. But on the other hand, the people of the area, they regarded him as a prophet. And he, didn't want to open that mess. He was a politician, and he just had to keep the crowd happy. Well, Herod had a birthday, verse 6. When Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised on an oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Now, I will say this, I think it's probably pretty good to be king. But even kings get tripped up by what they say. And Herod is going to make a promise here. I'll give you whatever you want, up to half the kingdom. Ask whatever you want. I'm the big hot shot. Herodias doesn't know, Herodias' daughter doesn't know what to ask for. So it says it's prompted by her mother. Now, that's what mom wants. Mom who's living with the king, who doesn't like the king being told that what they're doing is wrong, because she traded up from the brother who wasn't a king. And she doesn't like being reminded of who she is and what she did. She certainly doesn't like John the Baptist any. I would have come up with a gold chariot or something. I mean, I would have come up with something better than John's head. She says, give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter. The king was grieved. Now, it says he's grieved. This decision doesn't please him. This request doesn't please him. It bothers him. It just doesn't bother him enough not to do it. And here's his reason. Out of regard for his oaths, because he promised something, he got tripped up with what he said. And because the guests, he said it in front of people that he didn't want to have look foolish in front of. Because he said so, and there's people that heard him that they weren't impressed. He commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. The head was brought on a platter and given to the girl, who brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried it, and they went and told Jesus. Now, you may have remembered from other readings in other Gospels, John the Baptist had confessed Jesus as Lord in front of his disciples, and some of Jesus' disciples were people who left John and started following Jesus. So John and Jesus are cousins, so they know each other. They've had interaction during their time of ministry together, and when this happens, John's disciples bury the body and they go find Jesus. And that's where verse 13 picks up. Verse 13 says, when Jesus heard this, so the disciples come there, he's there someplace around Nazareth on the Sea of Galilee, and he's been doing his ministry, and he's been teaching and healing people. Now when Jesus heard this, he withdrew from there in a boat to a deserted place by himself. Now, Jesus' reaction to getting the news of John the Baptist being beheaded was to get away from everybody. Now, I think there's some reasons for that. I'm just guessing here. This is just my opinion. You don't have to take it. But I think Jesus got this news and he realized where he was in relation to his ministry. I think finding out the news that John the Baptist had died was a reminder of what he was going to have to do. I also think that John the Baptist's death probably affected him because this was his cousin. He cared about him. This is a witness that who Jesus was. This was important and it was personal. And Jesus' reaction to this was he wanted to get away by himself. So apparently he and the disciples get in a boat and they take off to some other part of the lake, some other part of the lake shore. Now he does that, but when the crowds heard it, remember all these crowds of people with sick people? They followed him on foot from the towns. So they see him going across the lake and they're hoofing it around the shoreline. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd. Remember, he got in the boat so he could go be by himself to sort out his own thoughts. And yet, here he is presented with this whole big group of folks that want to see him. So when he sees the crowd, instead of telling them, hey, bug off and leave me alone, instead of saying, hey, I need some prayer time, I need a sabbatical here, give me a break. It doesn't say that. It says he had compassion on them and cured their sick. So apparently this happened early in the day, and he spends a big part of the afternoon, because then it says when it was evening, the disciples came to him and said, this is a deserted place, and the hour is now late. Send the crowds away so that they may go into the villages and buy food for themselves. Now, that seems like a reasonable request. Because at dinner time, I'm usually getting hungry. I imagine that maybe one or two of you are the same way. You start seeing the sun go down and you haven't had anything since lunch, and it's time to eat, right? And they didn't have the Jewish equivalent of McDonald's on every corner. They were going to have to hoof it back to wherever the next closest town was and see if anybody had any extra food they'd sell. Well, that seems like a logical thing to say, and that's what they said to Jesus. But Jesus answers them, they need not go away. You give them something to eat. Now, I've worked in food service. I don't think I've ever had a crowd that was possibly between 10 and 12,000 people, which is what this crowd probably was. I have fed several hundred people at a time. I usually, when that happens, I usually like to have, stuff prepped, things ready to go in the oven. Waitresses are helpful in cases like this where you got a lot of people, or at least a really big buffet, right? You got to have some way to do this. And Jesus says this to them, and they had the reaction that I would have had, which is, what? It says what in the original Greek. You can just trust me on this. What? What are you thinking? Are you nuts? How can we do this? They replied, we have nothing here but 5 loaves and 2 fish. This is it. This is the entire pantry. This is the inventory. There is nothing in the walk-in, and we all forgot to bring our Yeti cooler full of snacks. He said, bring them here to me. You got some bread, you got some sardines. Bring it here. Okay. See, Jesus told them to do something, which was to feed everybody. They admitted, we can't feed anybody. Like, we got enough here for well, we're going to flip coins for what we got here because it's not enough. Bring it here. See, when Jesus gives you something to do, he gives you a way to get it done. Now, they didn't know how it was going to get done. They had no idea. Bring them here to me. Then he ordered the crowds to sit down on the grass. Taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven, blessed and broke the loaves, and gave them to the disciples, and the disciples gave them to the crowds. And all ate and were filled, and they took up what was left over of the broken pieces, 12 baskets full. God has all the provision anybody could ever want. God has the ability to do anything he tells us to do. In fact, if he tells us to do it, he's not really expecting us to do it so much as for us to cooperate with him in what he wants done. So when the disciples did their part of the feeding, which was to get everybody to sit down on the grass and to hand out the food, that was what he needed to have done. Now, I told you I think there's probably about 10 or 12,000 people here. This is why. And those who ate were about 5,000 men, besides the women and children. So if you figure there's 5,000 guys there, and you figure there's probably one gal for every guy, and if they're bringing their families, they probably got a couple kids with them, it's not too hard to see how that number is double or more than double that were actually fed there. That's it. It's a guess. That's not even Bible math. That's just Jim guessing, okay? There's nothing about that other than my guess. So he does this. They collect up all the leftovers. And verse 22 says, immediately he makes the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side. So he gets done with this miracle, and he tells the disciples, hey, beat it. Go over there. Get in the boat. Go. They do. Well, while he does that, he dismisses the crowds. And after he dismissed the crowds, he went up to the mountain by himself to pray. Now, the thing about this is this is what he started out to do this morning. When he got the news of John the Baptist, this is what he started out to do. He started to go up to have some time where he could go and pray and be with God to deal with whatever was going on that was in Jesus' heart that he needed to talk to the Father about. He didn't get to do it when he wanted to do it, because God put some ministry requirements in his way. And he dealt with them. And he took care of them. And he healed everybody. And he fed everybody. And he gave his disciples a great learning lesson about provision and all these things that happen. And finally he gets everybody to go away. And he gets to go up and find a spot and sit down and have some alone time with God that he needed. There's times when we need alone time with God, but other things are going to intervene. And just because those other things intervene, when those are taken care of, do not ever let the devil use that to distract you from having alone time with God. There may be times when you know you need to crack open wherever you're at in your daily devotional in your Bible and read a little bit. And maybe that night you crawl into bed and you're so dead dog tired you can't get through a whole day's worth of reading. Well, even if you can't get through a whole day's worth, get a couple pages in. Do something. And that's what Jesus did. He wanted to have all that time, and he didn't get all that time. But when he got time, he went and spent it. And that's when he did that, he did it by himself, and he involved him and the Father. Now, after he's done that, this is when evening came, so it's dark. He's there alone. But by this time, the boat was battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them. So the night is kind of worn on, and the guys have not been very successful about going to the other side of the lake because it didn't seem to take them that long to get there this morning. Now he is middle of the night. They're out in the boat. They're still rowing, trying to get to the other side. And it says in verse 25, and early in the morning, he came walking toward them on the sea. This is new. He hasn't done this before. He's walking towards them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified. It would kind of scare you, wouldn't it? Either that or you'd wonder where the rocks were that you didn't know about. So they were terrified, saying, "It's a ghost." And they cried out in fear. I think that's something like, "Ah!" in the original Greek. Like, who is this guy? What is this? What's going on? But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I. Do not be afraid." I guess ghosts don't say that. I don't know. I've never seen a ghost, and I've never seen Jesus walking on water. So I don't have a lot of experience in this. But him saying that was enough of a comfort, enough of a explanation, I guess, of what's going on, that Peter says, "Lord, if it's you, command me." Peter did actually learn something about provision. If Jesus says to do it, you can do it. Right? That was earlier in the chapter. "Lord, if it's you, command me to come to you on the water." Now, what if it wasn't Jesus? I mean, Peter did not think his request through. It is not a fail-safe situation here. Right? If that's not Jesus, it's like, well, why don't you come? He wouldn't know until he was sinking. But he tells Jesus, "If it's you, give me a proof that it's you. Show me it's you. Prove to me that it's you. If it's you, command me to come out there." Jesus is Jesus. Jesus knows who he is. Jesus doesn't have any doubts. Come on. Come. So Peter got out of the boat. Think about that for a minute. It's a storm. They think a ghost is coming across the water, which I think in sailor lore, that's not a good thing for the ship, right? You start seeing dead people. Peter, come. So Peter gets out of the boat and starts walking on the water. And he came toward Jesus. Peter got out of the boat and he starts doing this number. And he gets closer and closer to Jesus. Now, I don't know if Jesus was, from here to the communion table from Peter, or I don't know if Peter was from here to the wall from Jesus. I don't know if it was 100 yards, a quarter mile. I don't know how far it was. But Peter gets out and whoop. And he's doing it long enough that he realizes, I'm walking on water. What's going on? And then it sinks in that he's been just a little bit impulsive. It sinks in. What am I doing? But he noticed a strong wind, and he became frightened. I thought they were frightened in the boat. Apparently this is a different level of frightened. And beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Now Peter, for all the gruff Peter gets in a pulpit, none of which I believe is really deserved. A couple things about Peter. Peter has walked farther on water than I have. Period. If I tried to walk across the baptistry back there, and I think it's only about 6 foot long, I don't think I would get but about 6 inches before I slipped and fell and you had a big splash. I don't know if Peter made 100 yards. I don't know if he made 10 feet. I don't know, 2 steps, whatever he got. He walked on water because Jesus told him to. They fed a whole bunch of people because Jesus told them to. And when Peter saw that he had made a mistake, he cries out, Lord, save me. Because Peter's smarter than most of us. Because when we're in a jam, do we cry out, God, save me? I've messed up here. I don't know what I've done. Jesus, save me. Peter was smart enough to do that. So Jesus grabs his hand. Immediately, Jesus reached out his hand, caught him, saying, you have little faith, why did you doubt? Now, this is the point where my whole thing on what language did they speak from earlier comes in. We see here, there's a couple ways you can read this verse. You have little faith, why did you doubt? Is Jesus rebuking Peter? Now, that is the way traditionally I've heard this story. Oh, Peter, why? You don't have enough faith. But you see, they spoke a different language and different idioms and different expressions. You guys remember VeggieTales? I hope the squash didn't land on Bob the tomato over there. So they had different ways of speaking and different idioms, and sometimes that stuff gets translated. So this gets translated. It's very literal here. You have little faith. Why did you doubt? So it's almost like in our minds it comes across as a rebuke, but in the language that they used back then is, you've got faith. You had enough faith. You had enough faith. Now that's a true statement. That's very factual. Peter, you had enough faith. How much faith does it take to be successful when Jesus tells you to do something? A little bit. A little bit isn't like you didn't have enough. A little bit is you had all it takes. You only needed a little. That was all you needed. Why did you start to doubt? He's not Peter bad. That's not the way he's approaching this. You had enough faith to do what I told you to do. You didn't need to doubt. You had it all. You had everything you needed to do what God told you to do. If you have faith in Jesus Christ that you can be saved, if you have a saving faith, you have enough faith to do everything God wants you to do in this life. Everything. And it doesn't matter if he tells you to feed 5,000 men. It doesn't matter if he tells you to walk on water. You got enough faith for that. It doesn't take a big basket of faith. It takes a little bit of faith to do the thing he says. Well, I don't have faith to tell my neighbors about Jesus. Really? He's told you to tell people about to be his witness. How much faith do you need? If you have enough faith to believe in him, you have enough faith to talk to somebody about Jesus. Well, I saw somebody, they needed something, and I didn't know if they were really a good person, and I don't know if I gave them $10 if they'd use that for booze, or maybe they were on account on me. I don't know. Did God lay it on your heart to maybe give that person some money? Maybe invite that person over? Get to know them a little better? What was it that God asked you to do? It doesn't matter what it is. It doesn't matter if it's feed out fish. It doesn't matter if it's walk on water. What did God ask you to do? God asked you to do something this last week. And if you're a faithful follower of Jesus Christ, he's going to ask you to do something this next week. If you ask Jesus every day, Lord, give me something to do for your kingdom today, he will start answering that prayer, and he'll start making it obvious so you can't, miss it. I know he makes stuff obvious so we can't miss it because that's the way he deals with me. He's got to kind of dumb it down to my level sometimes, and he can do that. He's got. I imagine it might stretch getting it dumb enough, but he does it. So what is it God wants you to do? Because if you have enough faith to come and sit in this auditorium and listen to my sermon, unless you think that is somehow, on Judgment Day, you're going to say, well, God, we listened to Jim for like 2 years. And he's going to be like, you know what, well done, good and faithful. Get in here. You've suffered enough. Right? If you're thinking that's the way it works, it might. I don't know, but I don't think so. Right? So, what is it he wants you to do? Because he's given you enough faith to do it. He's given you enough faith to do it. Whatever it is. So, they get back in the boat. When they got into the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." I guess there might have been some doubt left after all the chasing out demons and healing all the sick people, the walking on the water in the wind, in the storm. And this whole walking on water, wind, and storm thing, it's going to have to happen again. He's going to drive the point home one more time. And the feeding everybody when there's not enough food, he's going to prove that to everybody again later. Just like healing everybody who comes along, he does that. Oh, you're blind? No. Oh, you can't walk? Get up. So they get crossed over. They get to the other side. They come to the land of, I can't say it, Gennesaret. So they get across. Now keep in mind, this has been going on all night, right? He walked across in the early morning. They're still stuck out on the lake from where he started them across. You know, these guys have been rowing. I bet they're a little bit tired. I can do about 10 minutes on the rowing machine at the gym. I start getting tired. They've been doing this for hours. I have only ever one time in my life, actually, I've had some scary sea stories for you, but I've only one time in my life been stuck in a boat where the only way for me to get to land was for me to row, and I rowed a little better than 8 hours that day into a headwind on Lake Superior trying to get landed on Isle Royal. And I know that what I did was I rolled out my sleeping bag as soon as I got to shore and got my canoe beached, and I went to sleep. And I was younger, skinnier, and much better shape than I am today when this happened. But they get across over. And as soon as the people recognize them, like they haven't even got a chance to get out of the boat and go get a shower and see if there's, if there's any McJesus left for breakfast. Right? As soon as the people recognize them, they send word throughout the region and they bring all the sick people to them. So he went from one side of the lake with a whole bunch of people. Everybody chased him over to the other side of the lake. He comes to another spot. And those people go and they find more people that need healing. It doesn't even say they got a nap. They might have. I don't know if they had coffee back then, but I'm sure Jesus could have imported it for them for this occasion. Doesn't even seem like they get a break. Brought all her sick to him and begged him that they might touch even the fringe of his cloak. Please, Jesus, let me just touch your robe. How much faith is that? Usually you want a prophet to do something for you. Anoint you with oil, maybe lay his hands on you. A good, long, big, drawn-out prayer with a lot of these and thous to make sure that God's paying attention. And then, bam-o, you get the blessing you wanted. And to get that blessing, we'll do anything, right? We'll put any amount of money on the plate. We'll do whatever. We'll promise whatever. Lord, you can have my firstborn kid. Whatever it is, God, just please, we want a big production. And these people aren't asking for a big production. Just please, Jesus, can I touch you? Can I touch your robe? And what does it say he did? Did he say it was a big production? It says everybody had this much faith. Watch that. This is a demonstration here. This is, in speech class they tell you to give a demonstration if you can. This is how much faith it took. That's how much faith. And that's Scripture. They reached out their hand and they touched Jesus. They touched the fringe, just the little hem part of his garment was enough to be healed, was enough to be made well. Just like it was enough to get out of the boat. Just like it was enough to have him sit down on the hillside on the grass and hand out the food, and everybody got everything they needed. And Jesus hasn't changed one bit. Everything we need, Jesus can provide if we have this much faith. And as tempting as it is to want to have a big production, as tempting as it is to want to have a fancy prayer, nothing wrong with fancy prayers. Pray it if you got it, right? But how much did Peter need to be saved when he was sinking? Jesus, save me. It's 3 words in English. I don't know what it was. At the time, I suspect it was something like, hey! How much faith do you need? How much faith do you got? That's our lesson this week. Thank you for listening. If you have a need that this church can help you out with, our congregation wants to. We want to help you. Maybe your need is, you need Jesus. You need to come to Jesus and get right with him. Maybe you've been right with him and you've fallen away and you need some help getting that sorted out. We got people here that'll sit with you, talk with you, pray with you, study Scripture with you. We even got some people here that go to the gun range with you and put some hot lead down range if that's what you're into. Actually, we got several of those, and they don't even view it as a hardship. So we have other people that just want to pray. We've got some prayer warriors in this church that if they know that you got a need, they'll pray for you, and they'll keep after God for a long time. And the prayer of a righteous man availeth much. If you need that, ask for it. Brandon's going to ask you to stand. So as you stand, and Brandon, what's our next song?